My name is Sarah Collins, and for almost a decade, I dedicated my life to a company that many people considered impossible to fix. When I first arrived, the warehouses were overflowing with misplaced products. Suppliers were angry, orders were constantly delayed, and employees had given up hope that things would ever improve. I was a single mother trying to provide for my children, so I accepted the challenge without realizing it would consume years of my life. Slowly, through patience and determination, I transformed chaos into order and built a system that everyone depended on. For years, I arrived before sunrise and often stayed long after everyone else had gone home. I studied every product, every supplier, every delivery schedule, and every mistake that had ever cost the company money. I created tracking systems, organized storage zones, and developed procedures that reduced errors dramatically. The work was exhausting, but seeing everything run smoothly made me proud because I knew my efforts were helping hundreds of people do their jobs successfully. As time passed, the company became known for reliability rather than confusion. Suppliers who once threatened to leave began trusting us again. Customers received their orders on time, and profits steadily increased. Most employees assumed the system was simple because everything worked so well, but they never saw the years of effort hidden beneath the surface. I never minded staying behind the scenes because I believed good work spoke for itself. Everything changed when a new manager named Victor arrived from another branch. He had impressive degrees, polished presentations, and endless corporate buzzwords. In meetings, he spoke confidently about efficiency and cost reduction, but he never bothered learning how the operation actually functioned. Instead, he focused on numbers and reports that made him look successful in front of executives while ignoring the people responsible for producing those results. At first, I tried to help him understand the business. I explained supplier relationships, seasonal inventory patterns, and the systems that kept everything running. Unfortunately, he rarely listened. Whenever I shared important details, he dismissed them as unnecessary complications. Over time, it became obvious that he believed anyone could do my job because he only saw the finished results rather than the experience required to achieve them. One Thursday morning, he called me into a small conference room and delivered news that changed everything. Without hesitation, he informed me that my position was being eliminated because the company had found someone willing to do the same work for much less money. He smiled as if he expected me to understand and appreciate his decision. After 9 years of loyalty, that was all the explanation he offered. I sat quietly for a moment trying to process what I had just heard. There were no discussions about performance issues, no warnings, and no appreciation for the years I had invested. He simply viewed me as an expense that could be reduced. When I asked who would take over my responsibilities, he casually mentioned that a replacement would start the following week and suggested I leave behind notes explaining everything. Returning to my workstation felt surreal. Around me, employees continued their normal routines while my career at the company was ending. I opened notebooks filled with years of information and attempted to summarize critical processes, supplier contacts, scheduling details, and inventory procedures. After several hours, I realized there was no way to compress nearly a decade of experience into a few pages of notes. As the afternoon passed, I packed my personal belongings into a cardboard box. There were family photographs, a coffee mug made by my daughter, and a few small items collected over the years. Looking at them reminded me how much of my life had been tied to that building. What hurt most wasn't losing the job itself, but realizing how little the company seemed to value everything I had contributed. Before leaving, I remembered that I had a scheduled meeting later that day with Robert, a senior executive who oversaw several regional operations. Years earlier, we had developed mutual respect after I helped resolve a difficult situation involving a young employee. Since then, he occasionally checked in to discuss business challenges and life outside work. I considered contacting him, but ultimately decided to go home first. Not long after arriving home, my phone began ringing repeatedly. When I finally answered, it was Robert asking why I had missed an important quarterly review meeting. Confused, I explained that I had been terminated earlier that morning. The silence on the other end was immediate and unmistakable. He clearly had no idea what had happened. A few minutes later, Human Resources contacted me requesting details about my termination. They asked whether proper procedures had been followed, whether documentation had been provided, and whether there had been performance concerns. My answers raised obvious concerns because none of those requirements had been met. The conversation left me wondering whether Victor had acted without consulting the people above him. That evening, Victor called, sounding nothing like the confident manager who had fired me earlier. His voice was tense and desperate as he explained there had been a misunderstanding and requested that I return immediately. Suddenly, I was no longer an unnecessary expense. Now, I was essential to operations and urgently needed to prepare reports that nobody else knew how to create. I listened carefully as he tried to justify his actions and convince me to return. He promised higher pay, improved benefits, and greater recognition. Ironically, these were opportunities that never existed until after I was gone. For years, my contributions had been ignored. Yet, within hours of my departure, they had become impossible to replace. The next day, the problems began appearing everywhere. Employees called asking where critical inventory was stored. Suppliers needed answers nobody else could provide. And managers struggled to understand systems they had never bothered learning. Information that seemed obvious to me turned out to be completely invisible to everyone else because they had never taken the time to understand how things worked. Victor's replacement hire lasted only a few hours before quitting. The position had been described as simple administrative work, but reality quickly proved otherwise. What appeared effortless from the outside required years of practical experience and problem-solving ability. The gap between perception and reality became impossible to ignore. Over the following weeks, operations deteriorated rapidly, deliveries were delayed, inventory was misplaced, supplier relationships suffered, and mistakes multiplied. Every problem revealed another piece of knowledge that had existed only in my experience and daily decisionism. The system had not been running itself as many people assumed. It had been running because someone was actively maintaining it. Meanwhile, I focused my energy on finding a new opportunity. Instead of dwelling on resentment, I updated my resume, contacted professional connections, and explored companies that valued operational expertise. Eventually, I received an offer from a growing manufacturing business that needed help organizing its distribution network and improving efficiency. From my first day there, the difference was remarkable. The owner personally introduced me to employees, explained company goals, and asked what resources I needed to succeed. Rather than expecting instant miracles, she understood that meaningful improvements required time, effort, and knowledge. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely respected. The new operation faced many challenges, but they were familiar challenges. Inventory was disorganized, supplier communication was inconsistent, and reporting systems needed improvement. Drawing upon everything I had learned throughout my career, I began building processes that created structure and accountability. Progress came steadily, and employees quickly embraced the improvements. As trust grew, suppliers also noticed the difference. Several long-term business partners who had worked with me previously reached out and expressed interest in expanding their relationships with my new employer. They valued reliability and professionalism more than corporate branding, and many chose to move significant portions of their business where they felt confident their needs would be handled properly. Months later, I learned that my former employer was still struggling to recover from the disruption. New managers worked hard to stabilize operations, but rebuilding trust and institutional knowledge proved difficult. Years of relationships and experience cannot simply be replaced with a cheaper employee or a new spreadsheet. At home, my children noticed changes long before I did. They said I seemed happier, less stressed, and more present. Looking back, I realized how much energy I had spent trying to prove my value to people who had already decided not to appreciate it. Losing that burden felt surprisingly liberating. As the company expanded, I was promoted to oversee multiple facilities and train future leaders. One of my greatest joys became mentoring younger employees who genuinely wanted to learn. Instead of guarding knowledge, I shared everything I knew. Because strong organizations survive by developing people rather than depending entirely on one person. Over time, former coworkers reached out to share their own experiences. Many admitted that my dismissal had changed the way they viewed the company. Watching someone dedicated and hardworking get treated as disposable forced them to reconsider what loyalty really meant. Several eventually pursued better opportunities elsewhere and found greater success. One conversation stayed with me more than any other. A former employee thanked me for helping him years earlier when he had made a costly mistake. He said my willingness to support rather than blame him had shaped the way he treated others throughout his career. Hearing that reminded me that leadership isn't about titles or authority. It's about the impact we have on people every day. Looking back now, being fired felt devastating in the moment, but it ultimately became one of the best things that ever happened to me. It pushed me toward a healthier environment, opened doors I never would have considered, and proved that true value isn't determined by a manager's opinion. Sometimes the end of one chapter is simply the beginning of a much better story. Thank you for spending your time with us and following this journey until the very end. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more powerful real-life inspired experiences about resilience, success, and karma, please subscribe and share our channel. We make these videos for you, and your support helps us continue bringing meaningful stories to audiences around the